Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another episode of Neglected Gem. And today's Neglected Gem is One False Move from 1992, directed by Carl Franklin and starring the late great Bill Paxton, Michael Beach, Billy Bob Thornton, who co-wrote the film, and Cynda Williams, who started dating Billy Bob Thornton near the end of the shoot and ended up marrying Billy Bob Thornton. This is a film that I actually saw in the cinema way back in 1992, which is baffling that it's 30 years ago. And it's also baffling that Carl Franklin really didn't have a wonderful career. Apart from being one of the best films of the 90s, One False Move was also Carl Franklin's debut, a theatrical release. And then 3 years later, he would make another one of my favourite films of the 90s, and one of the best films of the 90s, Devil in a Blue Dress with Denzel Washington. He would make another film with Denzel Washington, and then he would do lots of TV and stuff, but never quite had the career that he really deserved, I don't think. One-time actor turned director. This is the Imprint. Surprise, surprise. Spine number 127. And this is part of the After Dark neo-noir cinema. Ominously, it's got collection 1, so uh-oh for everybody's bank balance. And this has 6 neo-noir films in the standard wonderful Imprint box. It has a nice glossy, whoops, a daisy. It has a nice glossy whoopsie-daisy, which talks about each of the films with nice colour pictures. So we obviously get One False Move. We get After Dark, My Sweet, with James Foley. There's a couple of Jason Patric films in this box set. We've got Mortal Thoughts. We get Rush, with the aforementioned Jason Patric. Flesh and Bone. And Paul Newman in Twilight. Now I need to rewatch these ones, but we're talking about One False Move. But that's where it comes from. The wonderful After Dark neo-noir cinema. Collection 1. But One False Move, which for me, as I say, one of the best American films of the 90s. And it's right up there with David Mamet's Homicide for being one of the best American films about race, without specifically being about race or overtly about race. But it's about race. It's a fairly bog standard story, but something happens in the film about halfway through. We learn information about a couple of characters that really changes the film and elevates the film above its more kind of genre trappings. I probably will do a spoiler section near the end of the video, because it's worth talking about those changes. It's one of those films that not necessarily two halves, but there's certainly two threads that then come together. I do remember, as I said, seeing it in the cinema, and there were people that walked out after the first 10 minutes. So the film starts as we're introduced to this female character. It's in the city, in LA. She knocks on somebody's door of somebody's house, and she's known, and she goes in, and people are having a birthday party, and she says, I've left my purse out in the car. She opens the door, and Billy Bob Thornton and Michael Beach come in. Billy Bob Thornton plays a character called Ray, and Michael Beach plays a character called Pluto. We learn that the woman is called Fantasia. And Pluto and Ray proceed to terrorise the people in the house and rob them, and they want to know where they get their drugs from, and they brutalise the people. They then go to another house, brutalise the people there, to find drugs and money. And this is a film that has some lyrical aspects to it, but it does have bursts of brutal violence. And like I say, when I saw it in the cinema, there were people that left after the first 10 minutes because the first few scenes of the two home invasions are brutal and nasty, because strangely enough, violence is brutal and nasty. People don't seem to get upset in violence in a James Bond film or Marvel films, which are both extremely violent, but it's a different kind of violence. And generally when filmmakers do violence properly, as in it's nasty and horrible and brutal, they get into trouble. And this film does have strong language and strong violence in bursts. Most of it is in those opening scenes, but there are bursts of violence, and again, that might turn some people off, but if it does, sadly, you are missing a gem. Again, the violence is not glorified, it's not fetishized, it is brutal and nasty. So the three characters get the drugs and money, and the plan is they are going to go to Houston because Pluto knows somebody, and they're going to sell the drugs and become rich. And because of a witness being left, they are identified, and the LA cops find out information about Billy Bob Thornton's character, that he has relatives in Star City, Arkansas. They have a video recording, and they kind of isolate sound that Fantasia may have said she's heading to Star City, Arkansas, or Star City, and that's where Bill Paxton is. He is the local sheriff called Dale Dixon, but his nickname is the Hurricane. The film was going to be called Hurricane for a period. Because he's always in a rush, we see him speeding and almost causing traffic accidents. One of his deputies complains that they've never actually eaten a full meal while in service with him, because he's always in a rush and he never actually finishes what he's eating. So you have the two LA cops get sent to Arkansas to work with Bill Paxton, and of course Bill Paxton sees them as kind of heroes in the big time, in the big city. At one point he says he might actually see if he can apply and move to the big city to get into the big time. which obviously they kind of find amusing. But he's the one with the local knowledge, and again, for all their, big time detectives, he's the one that ends up kind of in the climax of the film, and they're essentially lost in the woods in Arkansas. The score is wonderful. It's very spare, Ry Cooder type electric guitar. There's a little bit of orchestration at times, and some harmonica later in the film, but it's a really moody, atmospheric film. You do, even from the opening credits and the opening notes on the guitar, you kind of know this is made with people with confidence who know what they're doing. It's a low budget film, but it looks gorgeous. It sounds beautiful as well. The tension in the scenes with the three criminals, because Fantasia may seem like an innocent, but again, she's not doing this against her will. Yes, the levels of violence she might not like, but at one point she becomes a participant in the violence, so she's not kind of an innocent along for the ride. Certainly wouldn't be in the eyes of the law. So there's real tension when the three characters are out in the world, that every scene you kind of find pretty tense, because you think some random person's going to get killed with these three people. Billy Bob Thornton, who at the time wasn't really known, he's the kind of loudmouth, brash, kind of southern trash, kind of thug who doesn't think before he acts. His first instinct is to shoot people. And then you have Michael Beach, and they wanted to make him the polar opposite. They shared jail time together, so that's how they know each other. But Michael Beach, wears glasses. We hear the cops on his jacket. He has an IQ of 150. He's more dangerous than Billy Bob Thornton, even though Billy Bob Thornton is kind of the loose cannon, but Michael Beach, as we see in the early scenes, he's the real dangerous one. He, is probably a psychopath, sociopath, and he gives a wonderful performance, and he's like the constant threat. And even Ray, you get a sense that Ray's scared of him. Ray fears him because of his intelligence, but also because he is truly dangerous. Not that Billy Bob Thornton isn't dangerous, because he's dangerous as well. And again, the character of Fantasia, there's more than kind of meets the eye as the film kind of develops. I'll go into spoilers in a little bit, so if you haven't seen the film, go check out. Again, pretty much the reason I bought this box set is for One False Move, because it's absolutely superb. And it's bizarre, I had it in DVD and I hadn't really watched it for years, but actually watching it again, it was like going back to 1992 and watching it. It's such a classy film, even though, like I say, it does contain brutal violence. But again, that's a small percentage of the film. Personally, I think it's Bill Paxton's best performance. It's really nuanced. He plays the good old boy. And again, it's talking about race, which I'll get to into the spoilers a bit more. And in a really kind of nuanced, intelligent, interesting way. So I couldn't recommend it highly enough, and it has been neglected, but you can put it up against the best American films in the 90s and it holds its own. The Imprint release is really good. There's a commentary from Carl Franklin, which I think is an archival one. There's a commentary by director Shaka King, who directed Judas and the Black Messiah, which I haven't seen because it's modern, and producer from 2022. There's an interview with Michael Beach from 2022, which is really good. And sadly, he talks about filming in Arkansas, both in 1986 with another film and in 1991 with One False Move, and having to deal with the Ku Klux Klan. And then there's a wonderful interview with Cynda Williams as well from 2022. She talks about how she got her start in Mo Better Blues, and people just kind of think she only did Mo Better Blues. But One False Move's a better film than Mo Better Blues, in my opinion. So that's really good. There's an interview with the editor, Carol Kravitz. And there's a video essay by Chris O'Neill from 2022, who does a lot of video essays on these Imprint releases, which are always really good. So, a great release. Who knows whether Imprint will actually release it on a standard Blu-ray, or somebody else might release it, but currently it's in this After Dark Imprint box set, which is going to be a lot of fun going through those 90s neo-noir. One False Move, yes, it's a neo-noir, but it's pretty much also a western. There's an element of that convergence, that high noon of baddies coming and the sheriff having to deal with it. But again, in the spoilers, I'll talk about how One False Move elevates itself from just that kind of genre. The bad guys are coming, and the good guys have got to stand up to them. So if you haven't seen the film, go watch it, and then if you like, you can come back and listen to me prattle on a little bit about spoilers. So, Fantasia is coming back to Star City, pretty much because she has a son there that her mother is looking after, and well, a Hammond spoiler alert, Bill Paxton is the father, even though he doesn't really want to admit he's the father. We learn that he arrested Lila, which is her real name. Spoiler alert. Lila is her real name when she was a teenager for shoplifting, and he also did some burglary of his own on her person. So you have that, because when he realises who Fantasia is, then his attitude to what's coming to his town is obviously challenged. His thoughts on what he may or may not have done. I think he knows he's the father, but he just doesn't want to tell the other part of his brain that he is and actually accept it. So she runs off from Houston with the money, so that's the reason that Ray and Pluto are then going to go the whole way to Star City to get the money back, because Pluto is tired of Ray at that point and he just wants his half of the money, his half of the drugs, and they're going to go their separate ways. So Fantasia comes to Star City, and with the help of her brother kind of secretly meets her son, and Bill Paxton follows and goes into the house to speak to her. And again, that just brings up the past and what's happened and how he's married with a child of his own, like an 8-year-old girl, and Fantasia's son is 5, I think. And of course, Fantasia changes how she talks to him, tries to get him on his side because she wants, obviously, to be let go and not go to prison, because after all, like I said, she wasn't just a bystander. She did actually shoot somebody. And it ends up that the LA cops, for all their skill and all their experience, they're the ones that are lost in the woods, basically trying to find where Fantasia is with Bill Paxton. So it ends up Bill Paxton has to take on Ray and Pluto by himself. But there's just beautiful scenes with him and Fantasia, and again she keeps saying our baby and our son, and of course Bill Paxton just doesn't want to hear that. He just doesn't want to accept it, even though, if you do the crime, you got to do the time. And again, that, she brings up about, white men just having sex with black women and then just denying all knowledge, not admitting it to their wives when they go back home or whatever. And again, it's such an atmospheric film, and it just adds the layers of what is a basic kind of story, a basic genre conceit, but the character stuff really just elevates it. And then in the end, you could say the way it works out is actually good for Bill Paxton, because Fantasia apparently hasn't told anybody of who the actual father is, but he's left at the end of the film, and the little boy, he has a little chat with the little boy, but we don't know, as the credits roll, whether Bill Paxton's actually going to admit to the little boy or to anybody what he actually did with Fantasia, i.e. have a child. That's kind of just left to the audience's imagination. In the end, you could kind of say it's a moral film as far as what happens to the characters, but you could also look at it and say, well, Bill Paxton's character maybe got off the hook a little bit with how the film ends. But that kind of, like I say, that other thread of the film just elevates it into a much better viewing experience than perhaps it would have been if it was just the straight, here's a sheriff in this town waiting for the bad guys to arrive. Beautifully played, great score. Again, the fact that it was Carol Franklin's debut, it's so assured, so well put together. Apparently there were script changes. It was a much more wordy script. It's quite spare because, again, it's to get that kind of noir feeling, but it's also that kind of western feeling. But it's just an absolutely beautiful film. And again, what kind of happened to Carl Franklin, I'm not quite sure, but he did make this wonderful film and this wonderful film. So thanks very much for watching this neglected gem. I apologise if that was a bit rambling, but it's quite late at night. So thanks very much for watching. Hope you'll join me again as I have a wee look at some more neglected gems. Let me know if you've seen One False Move and what you thought of it, and hopefully you'll join me again for more videos in the future. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.